What's going on YouTube? It is Texans Take over here, back with another video. In today's video, I want to touch on some talking points that I have before the Texans go into their joint practice with the Las Vegas Raiders. Almost wanted to say Oakland Raiders there. That's what I'm most familiar with them. Um, but yeah, some talking points that I have with the Texans going into this practice. The Raiders are a team that grew a lot throughout the offseason. They have Fernando Mendoza, but then they have Tyler Linderbaum coming in, Max Crosby's staying there. Jamal McCoy came in through the draft, Quay Walker, Nakobe Dean. So it's a new linebacking unit. And I think this team is a team that has some untapped potential and can take some steps up headed into next year. So I think the Texans do kind of have somewhat of their hands full coming into this practice. I don't think it's a practice that the Raiders should be winning. Usually you have a winner and loser at practice, and I think the Texans with their defense should definitely be winning this one because the Raiders aren't the best team in the world. It's just a team that's taking steps forward in their rebuild while the Texans are looking to contend. But I do think with the pieces they have, it should make for an interesting practice, and I think there are some things that the Texans fan base should be looking out for. Talking about Max Crosby, I think it's interesting to see how the offense tackles do against an elite edge rusher. Obviously, we have Ariante Ursary on the left, and then Trent Brown and Braden Smith on the right, and I think it's going to be an interesting battle on that right-hand side to see who fares best against Max Crosby. An elite level edge is going to be very good practice opposition for these tackles to see who's really going to win this battle throughout training camp and throughout the rest of preseason. Is it going to be Trent Brown? Is it going to be Braden Smith? And I think there is a right guard battle to be had too, because knowing the right tackles in Trent Brown and Braden Smith are so talented to the point where the Texans have to put Orr on the depth chart because they don't know who they want to roll with. I think it could translate to a right guard battle too, knowing that Braden Smith can play on the inside. Maybe you see Wyatt Teller bounce from left guard to right guard, and then you have Keelan Rutledge play left guard, and Evan Brown, Jarrett Patterson, one of those guys who can play center, play center. Maybe have Ed Ingram move out of the fold, and then you have Ariante Ursary, White, Teller, Keelan Rutledge, Braden Smith, and Trent Brown on the same offensive line, knowing that Braden Smith can play right guard. Or maybe you want to move Braden Smith to left guard and White Teller back to his natural position at right guard. I think it's going to be interesting to see what combinations work best for the Texans in this upcoming practice with the Las Vegas Raiders to see who the true five offensive linemen that the Texans should roll with might actually be. And I don't think the Texans should necessarily rush it, but I think it would be good for us to have some continuity on the offensive line, knowing who we're going to go into the season with and kind of stick with those five. I think mixing and matching the offensive line throughout the course of the season is only going to do more harm than good. So I think with these practices, if you see five clear standouts and you can find a way for them to mix and match on the offensive line, you stick them there, you start them against the Raiders, and then, that's kind of it. Um, Obviously, if someone gets hurt, then someone can come into the fold and you kind of mix and match again. But I think if you find five true offensive linemen that Nick Caley feels confident in, that CJ Stroud feel confident in, knowing that he can step up in the pocket and deliver the ball wherever he wants to deliver the ball to, knowing Nick Caley can kind of expand his playbook, make those deep shots as well as those intricate little unorthodox plays like the Xavier Hutchinson sweep we saw against the Chargers on the first play of the game. I think if you find an offensive line that you feel confident in that you can do that consistently with, then you kind of just roll with that. And I think that leads me into another talking point that I do have, and that is, can this offense get in rhythm? Against the Raiders, I think it would be nice to see this Texans team just find a rhythm. With the defense we have, it is tough for us to, throughout practice, find a rhythm, a consistent rhythm, I guess, on the offensive side of the ball. And I think that leads to some growing pains throughout the early course of the year. And I think if you're able to find those in the joint practices, then this is a legit offensive line or offensive unit, not just offensive line unit, but an offensive unit as a whole. And, you know, call some plays, make some long drives, see them in the Raiders game in preseason, obviously. Excuse me for coughing. Um, some people will be able to attend this practice. I'm not going to be able to. I'm already at college, but yeah, see if this offense can put together some good drives against the Raiders. Those 9 play, 10 play, 75-yard drives that end in a score, I think are going to be very valuable for this team to kind of just find some continuity on the offensive side of the ball. With CJ finding a defense that is, you know, not scheming in a practice manner, but actually scheming to kind of beat you. Um, I think it's going to be interesting to see how this offense fares, and I think CJ is going to find the receivers he can depend on that he has utilized throughout all of training camp. And then the offensive line is going to see some new blitzes, some new pickups that they have to do, so they're going to have to communicate really well, um, which will just help the offense fluctuate, the offense get in rhythm. Um, and I think this ties into if the run game can actually generate push with those five offensive linemen that we might find out tomorrow. I think it's going to be very important for them to play a physical style of football. Can they, push back Max Crosby? Can they generate push for David Montgomery to get those 5, 6 yard gains instead of those 2 to 3 we've seen in training camp. But to be fair, in training camp, they do blow the whistle very early. In these joint practices, I'd say they typically let it go a little bit more. So David Montgomery is going to have to fall forward a little bit more in these practices. So maybe those 2 to 3 yard gains that get blown early, he's still going to be able to turn his feet and pick up an extra couple of yards there. So we'll figure out tomorrow if this run game is able to generate some push against a decent defensive unit. I'm not going to say they're a top defensive unit, but I do think they will be decent. Clint Kubiak is a great offensive play caller too, so I think it's going to be a test for this defense to see if they're able to just dominate the day or not. Because the Raiders don't have a bad offensive line by any means. I think Jackson Powers Johnson's a decent guard. You have Linderbaum there now. You have Colton Miller, who I think is a decent left tackle, very good left tackle actually. So it's not a bad team, and I want to keep stressing that point. If you're able to dominate the day tomorrow, then I think you're feeling really good coming into the season as, you know, a whole as a team. If the offense finds rhythm, if the defense dominates, then in my opinion, you dominated the day, and I think that's something to build on, move forward with, and then you take that into the game. You apply that in the game. And for the drives that the starters run, if you're able to dominate that, then I think you feel really good about this team moving forward. And I think for the fan base, the way you feel good about this team moving forward is with CJ Stroud. And I think tomorrow, if he shows that he's clean with the ball and progresses through reads really well, then I think the team's going to kind of back him and feel confident with him at the helm at quarterback. And we know he's looking for a payday. He's going to have to do these things really well to warrant that payday. And this team has a championship caliber roster. It does rely on CJ Stroud having a decent year for us to be able to fulfill that. But yeah, we'll see tomorrow against a different defense that's giving him different looks. If he's able to be clean with the ball and progress through his reads, find not just Nico Collins, but Jaden Higgins, Jalen Knoll, if he practices, Tank Dell, if he practices, Jared Wayne, Lewis Bond, Zaire Hutchinson, who's had a really good couple of days, along with Lewis Bond, who's had very good couple of days. Yeah, we're going to be able to see if the pass attack does light it up against a defense that is not as superior as the Texans by any means. In Houston, you're going up against the best defense in the NFL by, I think, a considerable margin at this point if they're able to grow from last year, which I think they will be able to. I think some teams, when you're at the top, they go for big value in free agency, the upcoming free agents, and you kind of take a small step back, not the biggest step back. But with the Texans, they retained all their guys and they kind of just built. So I think it might be an even better defensive unit, which is just so scary for opposing teams. Not exactly the Texans, but it is hard for this offense to really find themselves in training camp due to how good this defense is. So we'll see how CJ Stroud in the passing attack fares. We'll see how the run game fares. And I think, one one thing about joint practices is the ones don't really, or other than the ones, they don't really get as much practice because they do have, sorry, they do have a full half or more of preseason football to play on Thursday. So it's kind of interesting to see, what rookies and, fringe roster guys are going to step up against this opposition tomorrow. Whenever they do get their opportunities, are they going to be able to cement themselves as not a key piece, but a piece on this roster moving forward? Guys like Lewis Bond, Colin Wright, Keelan Rutledge, who obviously has cemented himself, but rookies and fringe guys, I think, are the guys to look at. So if you're talking rookies, you're looking Lewis Bond, you're looking Colin Wright, you're looking Rutledge, you're looking Caden McDonald, you're looking Marlon Klein. You're looking at all those guys to see, are they able to make an impact against a different opposition? Do they instill the ideas that D'Amico Ryans is looking for in that swarm mentality, both on the offense and defensive side of the ball? I think it's going to be very interesting to see how they fare tomorrow. And then fringe roster guys, can they step up? Guys like Jake Hummel, who I thought looked decent in the preseason game against the Chargers, who's a very good special teamer. Jared Wayne, who's fighting for a roster spot at receiver. Same with Justin Watson. Same with Cade Stover, who's fighting for a roster spot. All those guys, even Evan Brown, Jared Patterson, Jake Andrews, guys fighting for roster spots on the offensive line. On the defensive line, you're looking at Naquan Jones, Mario Edwards, Dominic Robinson, Dylan Horton. In the linebacking core, if Jake Hanson's able to come back, you're looking at Jake Hanson, Jake Hummel, who I already talked about, Jamal Hill, Marte Moppet, who I didn't think looked great, Tremont Smith, Radden Codrington. I don't think Jamarcus Ingram's going to be able to practice, but those guys in the secondary that are kind of fighting for spots, you're really going to be looking at them to see if they're able to create an impact tomorrow, as well as in that game against the Raiders to kind of cement their spot on the Texans roster. Excuse me. If they're able to kind of impress tomorrow and have some eyes on them headed into the Raiders game, and then they follow that up with a very good performance, and there's a very good chance they make the roster, in my opinion. I think that's kind of where, you know, you show out is if you have a good day against a good practice day against different opposition to the point where the fan base and the coaches are kind of talking about you in a good light, and then you follow that up with a good game, then it's kind of like, have they been doing this all camp? And if they've had a fine camp, then you think, oh yeah, this is a player that should make this roster. So it's really an opportunity for guys to cement themselves on this team. And I think the first team's going to be out there mostly tomorrow, but there is the chance that you do have some second teamers, some third teamers kind of just make an impact and create a name for themselves on this Texans team. So I think those are the things you should be looking out for in this practice against the Raiders with the reports, with the fans being there. I think, yeah, it is going to be very interesting to see how this Texans team fares, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see if we dominate the day on offense as well as defense, or just on one side of the ball and not the other. Um, Obviously, I think we're going to win the defensive battle, but how will the offense fare, and how will the defense do against Clint Kubiak-led um, offensive scheme? So, yeah, these are the talking points I wanted to touch on. Um, Prior to the Texans practice with the Las Vegas Raiders. And I'm probably going to hop off this camera and have a complete cough attack. I don't know what is in the air, but I just can't stop coughing. So that's great. But yeah, that's everything I wanted to touch on in this video. If you did enjoy, please be sure to like, subscribe. And thanks again so much for watching. And as always, it's Texans Takeover, and I'm out. Peace.